Hello there. So I'm David Bradley, aka Schizophreniforms, and this is my good friend, Mr. Eddie Hayden Smith.
Why howdy.
Why howdy. And so this is obviously episode 7 now, episode 7 of the podcast. And I brought Eddie here to chat with me about a variety of topics, but I thought maybe we should get a bit of background about our friendship and why I've just sort of invited you here, like on what basis. Mm-hmm. So, like, Eddie is a musician friend of mine. You were tell us a bit about your career and stuff.
So I'm a musician and a sound engineer, and I teach music and do that kind of stuff. And I'm a bass player, and
what's your main instrument?
Yeah, and I play in a band called Chop Chop, which is a kind of jam band, experimental type thing. And I don't know.
So that's what you do. That's your living. That's your passion. That's
yes.
Yes. And essentially, so in more recent times, I suppose, you've forayed into Buddhism specifically. It's caught your interest more than just a novel. Something you're aware of. It's actually become something you're starting to research and think about. And
So I'd say not necessarily, but like I definitely I'm not interested in it in any kind of religious sense or anything like that. And I think I think that it's something that.
So you'd perhaps even say that you would shy away from terming yourself a Buddhist the most.
Yeah, definitely. I would never call myself a Buddhist because I think I think it's something that's been sadly kind of misconstrued in that way, really, because like the Buddha, if he was a real person, but he talked about many things, and he would obviously he said a lot, pointed out that he was just a person, a human being, and everything he realised was just through human intelligence and human.
And there's potential for all of us, and it's not necessarily a mystically significant thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and he was very. He talked all the time about not believing things because.
So a good way of summarising that earlier, actually, by this guy Adyashanti, and he said the Buddha would come from these long, elaborate talks and teachings of his Dharma, and would say, even the Dharma is empty. That, like, and the way it was used in the video I was watching was to say that. So it applies to both statements, but the sentiment he was expressing, the guy, was more like that it falls short of description, and it's just something you have to experience yourself.
Yeah.
But the same sentiment can be applied to what you're saying as well. It's like these are fundamentally human experiences. It's not. Which does actually lead nicely into the first sort of topic I wanted to discuss with you. Mm. But if you had more to say first.
No. Yeah, and I was just going to point out the other thing that it's another reason why it's often, one of the things that he apparently often stressed was that you should never believe something just because you're told, and you should try and experience everything for yourself. So he said all the time, what the things I'm talking about, you should never just believe me. You should try and observe this stuff for yourself. So it's like almost the opposite of religion, really. Yeah. It's not. Most religions tell you, oh, you should believe this because we're in a position of authority to tell you that this is the truth, whereas he would, and basically
this is where I share your opinion on that quite strongly, actually.
Mm. And basically he was just a philosopher and a philosopher, psychologist, someone who also one of the first sort of real scientific thinkers, really, the way he talked about cause and effect and everything. But also definitely not a religion, really, and it kind of shouldn't be, really. Anyway, that's
and although those ideas can be valued and useful from a point of self-discovery or from knowledge, you shouldn't worship him.
Yeah, exactly.
As a deity.
Yeah, and also there are plenty of people in the world who call themselves Buddhists, and they follow certain rituals, and they believe that that's going to somehow save them, and they just approach it in this kind of same way that lots of people. It's not about it's not about following in the footsteps of the Buddha.
Mm.
They're not interested in that. They're just interested in, they believe they go and do certain rituals, and as a favour from the universe, they're going to get good things happen to them and stuff, because
that's quite a Hindu belief as well.
It's just a general
this thing
religious
about Kali
belief
Yuga, and I was talking to a Hare Krishna guy who was saying some very interesting stuff, and I will actually be having a guy called Prana Govinda hopefully come into an interview about Krishna and things like that, and the relevance that has to him in self-discovery and so on and so forth. But the idea that we're in Kali Yuga and that no one can, so from a mystical perspective, that no one can self-substantiate themselves into being God in the age we're in at the moment. That's like a very Hindu thing,
Right.
and that like you said, that the ritual itself will somehow gift them enlightenment, and that you require the grace of God, for example.
Yeah.
Like you might say that in Christianity as well.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Although, I mean, it's in some way I think that's almost been a bit too. I mean, I don't really know how to say this, but I mean, a lot of people are just, involved in religion because they've been brought up that way, and they've been sort of have these rituals indoctrinated into them and these kind of things, and it no longer becomes, there's nothing.
It's not a voyage of self-discovery. It's just
it's
following
thing.
because you're told what to do. And like for example,
for example, Burma is, the nation has been committing all these atrocities against these Muslims there, and they're supposedly a Buddhist nation, right? But Buddhism has nothing to do with violence. Like, if you're a Buddhist, if you call yourself a Buddhist, you should only do that if you want to follow in the path of the Buddha, and you would. It's very strictly prohibits violence. I mean, I think people
self-defense, but attack itself is.
I think it. I think it'd be debatable whether it would cover self-defense or not. But I mean,
I don't mean those events. I mean
but whether even that would be allowed in.
Oh really?
I mean,
that's interesting.
I think.
I remember quite a few quotes I heard from the Dalai Lama, and one of them comes to mind, which is
the Dalai Lama talks about that because he supported. I think he. I don't want to get my facts wrong about this, but he somehow supported some fighting against the Chinese, which involved violence in Tibet and stuff. So he was, and
the basic argument that I heard presented was that like for example, if you take the example of anger, it's appropriate to respond to anger if you see an injustice and it makes you angry, then obviously expressing that anger through violence is not necessarily the wise way to deal with it.
Yeah.
But being motivated by your anger to change the circumstances, and if that requires violence, then perhaps even violence itself may be necessary if there's no alternate solution to resolve that damaging or harmful situation where you see injustice and you see morally wrong, corrupt behaviour.
Yeah.
Then even in some cases, even violence. I'm paraphrasing, but in some cases, violence can be necessary.
I don't know. I don't actually know at all enough about the actual words of the Buddha and the original Buddhist text to really debate it. Yeah, I'm not really sure, but I'm not really sure. I was under the impression it's pretty much totally, because I mean, people who follow Buddhism very strictly, it becomes a dilemma for them when, for example, they have a wasp's nest in a monastery, for example. You're not meant to. That it becomes a conundrum, a philosophical conundrum, religious conundrum, whatever. Yeah, they don't know what to do because they're not meant to even kill you're not meant to kill wasps. You're not meant to kill anything. It's just kind of it becomes. Anyway, but I don't really know enough about the actual text on it and stuff too.
Nor do I. And again, in my own case, what I was just saying then was second-hand information. I read it out of a book that's supposedly quoting the Dalai Lama, supposedly quoting Buddhism, supposedly quoting the Buddha.
Yeah.
So. If I went to source teaching and source scripture about it, my understanding of it might be entirely different. And like you said as well, I'm not knowledgeable enough to. I'm not well read enough on the subject to know for certain what the answer would be to that. So, one of the things I wanted to discuss that I thought you might have an interesting perspective on, based on conversations we've had before, is to frame it, is my own experience where. So on my through my mental health issues and how easy it is for me to go into what some people might consider a visionary state, which I consider a heightened state of awareness or a hallucinatory state, let's say, whereby that tendency facilitates me having more and more visions of deity. It's not particularly difficult for me to enter into a state, perhaps sometimes even happens spontaneously, where I feel quite compelling and see quite compelling imagery and hear sounds and so on and so forth, that I've had to work for a very long time to overcome the idea that that might be of spiritual significance, that might be actual deity. And in my understanding over time, I've come to accept that perhaps it's not, and that's been a big part of my recovery. And I've used these sort of spiritual technologies like meditation and stuff like that to learn to mediate those symptoms and those experiences and come to navigate them and digest them. Whereas for you, it's more of a self-exploratory tool, and so rather than necessarily using Buddhism as a religious or spiritual device, it's similar to me, but from a different angle of non-belief. Because as we were talking earlier, you don't necessarily you definitely don't identify as someone who believes in God.
No. Yeah.
And you sort of said agnostic in base to the, but you don't believe in God currently, and that's not part of your belief structure or why you're approaching Buddhism.
Yeah. So well, I think there's a few interesting points here. Like one, I'd be really interested to hear a bit more about your experiences and stuff in more detail. And also, although you may have already talked about them on this channel before, so maybe you don't.
I'm perfectly happy of going over that again, like if it's relevant to the conversation.
No, I think that'd be, and then also about the agnostic thing. I definitely would say in almost everything, it'd be more accurate to say I was agnostic, because I feel like at the end of the day I can talk about it, it's fun to have metaphysical conversations and speculate about meaning of life and things, but at the end of the day, like, I feel like, well, what the hell do I know, like, I'm going to be wrong about everything, and I'm perfectly open to that. So
that's why it's so interesting to have those metaphysical debates with you as well, and those conversations that we've had in the past, in personal circumstances, is like you are quite open-minded. You are willing to at least imagine the sort of things that I've experienced, and what That's
I
mentioned.
I think I could be more. It should be more open really than I am sometimes. But in my sane moments when I think about it, I think, well, what the hell, you go, I had that ridiculous metaphysical conversation the other night with you or someone else, and then you think, and then I think back to it, and I'm like, why was I so sure about any of that stuff?
This is something I frequently feel, especially now.
And then you feel a bit stupid. You're like, why?
It's like what qualifies me and what gives me the right to make these assertions. And then part of me thinks that, like, by virtue of having a unique human perspective and everything like that, like, it's almost like a birthright to have these opinions, even if you're wrong. Like, it's part of our human development to ask these questions. It's not necessarily uniquely human to have these questions or responses, but it's something that we've developed over time.
And it's fun to explore them, and probably
There's nothing wrong with expressing what you understand, even if you are wrong. When often this is how, like, when I have a delusional framework or I'm paranoid about something, even if I express it, hearing myself express it makes that sound ridiculous, what I'm delusional and paranoid about, and thus it shows me through the person's reaction and my own description of it that that's probably a delusional paranoid thought. So there's nothing wrong with clarifying.
And it was like you were saying before we started filming this, like, we might watch it back and go, oh my god, I can't believe I was saying that stuff, and then correct your opinions, But anyway,
that leads to further personal development as well.
But then the other thing, so what were we just talking about? It was the agnostic and
agnosticism.
And the idea about yes, please, so about and also you use that word that maybe I'm maybe I use meditation as more of like a less of a kind of spiritual or mystical thing, and more of a kind of
self-development.
Yeah, but I think that that was the other point I was going to say, was I think in Buddhism, if you when you read the original kind of teachings of Buddhism, it's not mystical, like it's not spiritual or mystical particularly. There's some very small amount of metaphysical stuff that they talk about a bit, but it's pretty much all concerned with alleviating human suffering and observing reality as it is. So it's actually very sort of spiritual and mystical. I mean, it depends how you use the word spiritual, but for example, Buddhism teaches there is no spirit.
Sure,
There is no soul. So how can you be spiritual if there is no spirit? Like it's not a particularly spiritual thing. Buddhism it's not spiritual. It's kind of the opposite, you know.
But like any technology,
but it depends what we mean by that word spiritual.
Well, I happen to agree with what you're saying. But if anything, that's why I often use cross terminology from things like Hinduism or Christianity to try and explain my own perceptions of reality.
Yeah.
And there's a good, I'll show you at some point, but I did one called Terminology and Translation, which kind of addresses this issue, and it talks about, loosely anyway, it talks about the idea that religion can be fundamentally flawed in some areas because it has a finite concept, like each religion has a finite non-universal terminology to describe the same phenomena in a lot of regards. And like, for example, what I was arguing in the video is like the difference between sanity and insanity is how you translate the experience you're having. If someone else can understand, at least if you're able to rationally explain an experience, then in the terms that the person will understand, then that can be much more useful. So like using like terms of psychology or psychedelia, or even sort of new wave hippie oriented language, at least it's not attached to one particular dogma that requires. Do you see what I mean? Like, so my experience of God might conjure in you the image of Yahweh or Jesus.
Yeah.
And so, or like it might conjure the image of Krishna or the Buddha or any sort of supposed mystical, or the Godhead, or Brahman, or any of these things like that. Anything.
So you're saying there is no compatibility between those terms. So, for example, if I had an idea of God, it would always be different from your idea of God. Is that what we're saying? It would always be a different thing.
Unless we were reading from the same song sheet,
Yeah.
Unless we had the same experiences or roughly the same frames of reference.
Yeah.
There's a lot of incompatibility between notions of deity, basically.
But unless there is an experience which is universal,
which I would argue there is. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Oh, but I thought it was almost like you were saying there wasn't. You were saying that.
Oh no, there's no universality of terminology.
Terminology. Okay.
So like even the fact that we have different names for these avatars of God, like Jesus, Krishna, Yahweh, and a lot of religions like in Islam, Jesus is considered a prophet of Islam. Everyone has their own, and everyone has their own specific sacred interpretation of God, and I would argue that whilst the state of divine visions and to be able to enter a state of oneness and all these things discussed, and extreme reverence and awe in nature and all of the things that conjured by all these experiences, it's how you digest and then phrase and explain that determines the quality of those experiences, as well as your past experience prior to the visionary state.
So you were saying there is a universal experience, which is which people try and use the word God to describe.
Yeah.
But then by the way they tried to describe it, it gets lost in translation between all these different.
Yeah, and also how they interpret what they're seeing, and almost even down to what they actually see as the vision of God.
Right,
that can be changed by their prior understanding and belief in what it is.
Yeah.
So, like, say, Terence McKenna talks about this certain phenomena.
Yeah, right, yeah.
But since there was Roswell and all these people presented, since people travelled into space in the 60s, was it 64 the moon landing? They introduced this idea, and then you get more alien abductions coming, but with the same phenomenological data as, say, to the same actual base experience as these divine revelatory experiences that people have in religion or on psychedelics or on so on and so forth.
Right.
So with all that in mind, that leads us on to the very first topic I wanted to discuss, which is, if in your quite scientific approach, or like at least not as a scientist, but the methodology of sincere observation, objective observation as much as possible.
Yeah, I wouldn't pretend I was a scientist, but the teachings of the Buddha are, in my opinion, very scientific. So I wouldn't kind of. I wouldn't be arrogant enough to pretend that I'm being able to be objective or scientific at all. But the goal,
maybe not at all. But you're endeavouring to be as objective.
The goal
as
of
possible.
in my opinion, the goal of sort of the methodology of in Buddhism and Vipassana, insight, meditation, and that kind of stuff is
which you have done, which is worth mentioning, because you're saying what qualifies you to say that. For example, you've done a Vipassana retreat, and you have actually studied this to a certain extent. In the areas that are relevant to you and are interesting.
I've done a certain number of hours of meditation, but that's probably still analogous to, say, if I was learning the guitar, I'd still be very much a beginner in the meditation world.
Well, they say it takes 10,000 hours of practice to master anything.
Exactly.
So, like when you've done Vipassana for 10,000 hours, if that was something you would be able to conceive of, like you might be qualified. Like 20 years time, you've had that 10,000 hours experience. You might teach Buddhism, and even if it's not from a mystical perspective, you could arguably with that practice.
Oh yeah, no, of course. I think someone who's done that much. Anyway, sorry, but I was.
So the idea I wanted to present was one of that I've thought about a lot, because this is what happened to me. Is like through the voyage of self-discovery and through the nature of my mind, but also through self-discovery with experimentation with things like psychedelic plants, LSD, things like that, especially DMT, and various other chemicals that I've used on top of my already naturally, arguably, one way or the other, visionary states that I entered into anyway. I've been presented with what I consider to be evidence for the experience that people have when they say they've seen God or had a conversation with God. Now, as I've argued with another friend of mine, who hopefully I'm going to feature at some point, but I won't say his name just in case he doesn't want to do it. I think the value is in the experience itself, the potential of the human mind to experience that it is talking to a deity, and that while that may not be an external being, like the limitations of religion, for example, is that it is an impersonal God. That's what I find interesting with the Hindu perspective, or especially in Buddhism. When I try to cross-correlate Buddhism with my spiritual experiences, it's like the idea that you can become God or embody God or submit to God and thus become it.
Isn't that more kind of Hinduism?
That's more Hinduism. But I think with the techniques that are used in Buddhism, it makes it a lot more easy to access these things. And do you think that if in your own experience and discovery with it, that you were presented with an image of deity that was quite compelling, how do you think, especially based on what we're saying with all this in mind, how do you think you might respond to it? And B, do you think that same scientific rigour or that same scientific approach would still be relevant? Because I think it would, but
I suppose it would depend what you mean by an image of deity, because I can't even really imagine what that means, because I've never had it and I don't know. I mean, for example, if I was meditating and I saw an image of Krishna or something, or Shiva, or Jesus, and just saw it clearly, and I don't think I would I don't think I would believe it was real. I think I would just assume that I was
You
hallucinating.
naturally question it.
Well, I wouldn't question it. I'd just go, "Oh, my brain created that interesting image."
That it was real.
Yeah, I think I would just assume it was a hallucination.
Yeah, and I would encourage that.
Yeah.
But what is interesting is if you have this phenomena occur, and then the dialogue and the conversation that you have with it that's where it becomes compelling. Because I've written about this at great length in my private journal and stuff like that. It's like it's not the avatar or the image or the representation is what I believe in.
Right.
Because I argue this in something I've written that says where I say that, and I've had direct experience of this. Like I used to pray to Yahweh, the Christian God, or to Jesus, aka Joshua, or however you want to. And I used to see images of that. And in my meditations and hallucinations, I would see very Christian-themed stuff. And I still do to an extent. But when in my meditation, or in my hallucinations, I've addressed that force as though it was the Buddha. It appeared as the Buddha. And lotus petals fell down upon me, and I saw an image spiral out of a lotus flower, and things like that. So the imagery's in there. And it's how you connect that with the information that's coming. It's even if that's an aspect of the self that you're talking to, your own. Like some people call it the higher self, things like that. Yeah. There's loads of different ways of explaining it and digesting it. But what is interesting is the information it gives you.
So what information does it give you?
Things like just really brutally honest explanations about what you need to do with your life, or really warm, compassionate things about where you've suffered, and reflections on that. And it's always a lot of it's personal information, but then it's like this. That's why I said that Rent mentioned the higher self aspect of it. It's a part of you that is so zoomed out and removed from your situation,
right?
That it seems alien. And
I wonder if it's similar to that. When people take ayahuasca or ibogaine or something, and they often report that there's some entity in the plant, and that shows them things in their life, shows them how they need to improve their life, or that things they need to change in their life, and it kind of shows them all this stuff, and it feels like an alien entity that is the plant talking to them. And
well, I haven't done ayahuasca myself, obviously. I would have told you about that.
Yeah. But I wonder if it did psychologically what's going on is similar.
I think it's the imagery associated with it as well. Quite often, some people will see a serpent.
Yeah.
And
but for example,
people will have. So it's hard to know, because with something like ayahuasca, it's like the imagery is consistent, even regardless of background. That's what's quite interesting.
Yeah, but it's probably consistent because people know it's from the Amazon rainforest when they take it, and that's going to influence.
But the snake specifically is the serpent there. And the feeling that it's a female energy, a female entity, a mother goddess.
Yeah.
And this comes from people that have done it in their living rooms that have barely even heard of it. They still have that same kind of imagery. Some people don't have that imagery, but like with people, like in the Rick Strassman experiments that I've read a book about called The Spirit Molecule, which you know of it.
No, I haven't really. Yeah.
Well, in his thing, when he did this study with injecting people with liquid DMT, which a gram, like a liquid gram, so what would that be, 1 mil of pure substance. He actually stopped the experiments because he considered it too significant, the correlation and the extremeness of the trips, that he couldn't any further deny that it had some sort of significance other than just that it was almost like he felt like he was abusing the substance, because it was, to the people who was experiencing it, it felt like they had gone to the afterlife and died. So there's two sides to the coin. It's
so you're saying he claims that he noticed
patterns in the trip reports,
really similar patterns in trip reports, and that supposedly
from
people
regardless of background.
Yeah.
So there's commonality to the experience, basically. And from the little bits of DMT I've smoked, there's a huge amount of information in there. And I've never done, obviously, anything anywhere even approaching what people call a breakthrough dose, or a liquid injection of it. That to me sounds terrifying. But it definitely feels like there's an impersonal deity there that I've interacted with. on a couple of occasions when I've smoked it, especially if I've done a lot and on my own. That alien consciousness seems to be there. And now whether that's caused by the drug or whether it's self-generated and the drug triggers that perception, it's almost like, to me, there's no difference.
Right.
It's just a case of how you explain it, how you rationalise it, because the information is still there, the interaction is still there.
Yeah.
And that's sort of why I was presenting this question, was like, if you came across something that was compelling enough that you thought it was an alien entity, how would you personally deal with that? Because it's almost something I want lots of people's opinions on, because there's such a variance in that.
I mean, I think I would still just assume it was a part of my own subconscious, my own psyche, a product, like, well, obviously everything is a product of your own brain, but like, I mean, you know, that there I wouldn't assume that there was necessarily a kind of metaphysical correlation, as in there is actually some separate entity somewhere that is actually sending me these messages. I wouldn't necessarily assume that. I would just assume that it was still a product of my brain, you know.
Yeah, but like, that might only occur post the event, because when you're there,
obviously in the middle, of course,
that's what strikes me with my sort of A, demonic, and B, angelic visionary states that I've been in. It's like, you're so consumed by the experience, and this is where I think a lot of people go wrong, and it's partly why I wanted to discuss it, is that, like, they don't have a healthy framework for breaking down that experience. And like, for me, what I do with things like that is I approach it from as objective, so as a point of observation, basically. Like, I just wondered what you thought about that, like having just like seeing, so if you're in that visionary state, and just seeing, okay, I can't really affect this because it's overwhelming, so just observe what's there. And like, in my own trips, like, as soon as you stop resisting it, my own hallucination, as soon as I stop resisting it, it becomes so much more empowering experience, and you're able to try and, rather than trying to influence the outcome, just observe what's there. And that's why I thought your approach reminds me of that quite a lot, actually.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it would, I suppose meditation's all about how much practice you've done. I mean, you know, I suppose if I'd be more likely to end up doing that if I'd have done a lot of practice recently or something, if I ended up in a state of mind like that, and I had been in recent days doing a lot of meditations, I mean, you'd be more likely to then start being more like more calm and trying to observe it, how it is, and stuff, you know, and kind of realising that it's going to change and it's going to end, and, you know, like, but it would depend.
Well,
you know, I wouldn't necessarily end up thinking like that at all, you know. I can't pretend I would. I might start freaking out, and I've never had an experience like that, so I don't know what I would do. But I would imagine it in the days afterwards. I would think to myself, well, that was probably created by my own mind. It doesn't mean that this entity actually exists. I would probably outside. Obviously, it still exists in a way, but like, everything.
So further, I would argue that regardless of whether it exists, the key thing that keeps me sane is listening to the information.
Oh yeah, totally, and
using it as a tool, even if it's just a discovery
of
yourself.
There's no reason why that information wouldn't be. Yeah, I mean, well, the only information we have, in a way, is produced by our brain. Like, we've never experienced anything in this world ever
as it really is.
Well, we've also never experienced anything that is not created by our own brain. Like, like every single thing we've experienced,
it's like everything effectively. This is a hallucination.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. It is. It is like every single sight, every single sound, every single touch, everything, every thought is a sensation that is created by a brain.
Sure.
Like, that's all it is. So,
and I would further add to that that's why altered states of consciousness can feel like different realities. Because it's literally using a different processing framework.
Yeah, it creates a different
set of.
Yeah, it creates this reality, so it just creates other ones as well.
Yeah,
I guess.
That's something that leads me on. What was question 2? I'm trying to see if it's. Yeah, what would convince? There we go. That's that. So that makes it very relevant. What would convince you? What form of evidence do you think, on the basis of your non-belief, or your agnosticism, would an experience like that? You know, how far would it have to take you down?
For me to actually believe that it was a deity that actually exists outside of my brain, kind of thing. That on that literal level.
What would it require? Because I'm not saying I'll be able to give you that. I'm just using it as an explorative tool.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Maybe some kind of scenario where, you know, which I know you've talked about. It has felt like that for you before. That you feel like it's giving you information that you couldn't have possibly known otherwise, or something,
Sure.
or that you, like premonitions or something.
Psychic phenomena, basically.
Yeah. Like it's like something that you can't, you know, because it's all about. I suppose, you know, if you're trying to look at things objectively, it's like you've got to, you know, Occam's razor. So
What was that?
Occam's razor is like the I don't know how to explain it that way, but it's basically the simplest explanation for something is usually the correct one.
Yeah.
So, for example, if you go like to me, oh, do I believe in God? Well, I'd go like the simplest explanation is there isn't. So that's what I would say. You know, that would be my approach.
Yeah.
So for example, if I had an experience of a deity, and I had this, I'd go, okay, well, the simplest explanation is it's created by my brain, and it was an interesting experience. There's probably information there, but it was created by. But then, if say I felt like it was giving me information I couldn't explain, like premonitions or something, and I tried really hard to explain it logically, but I couldn't. Then I might go, okay, well, actually, now maybe Occam's razor is actually maybe you'd have to go, well, maybe the simplest explanation is that there is information coming from somewhere else. Do you know what I mean? You get to the point where actually that would be logical to assume that because there were unexplainable phenomenon happening.
So that's almost where I'm at. That's the point where I'm at is at that point of indecision of like I've had to work for possibly 10 years now, and the sort of ESP and psi phenomena I did experience in relation to those experiences of either demonic or angelic forces. That's interesting that you've said that that's what it would take, because that's what I've been presented with, and even still now I doubt the validity of those experiences as a matter of sanity, as a matter of course, as a matter of rational strength.
But have you got ways? I mean, you know, because also it's really hard to. It's really hard to look at these things very objectively, because obviously we have things like confirmation bias, which is you know it's really hard as human beings to ignore that I mean to be always aware of your confirmation bias and stuff. You know, things like that.
Any true objectivity is impossible from a point of a perspective of a being that is subjective.
Yeah.
And experiencing everything subjective.
So, like, what I mean is, do you still are there still rational, even if sometimes are there still, you know, even obviously one explanation is that it's psychic phenomena or whatever. Is there still a way that you could explain it rationally? You could construct a narrative that explains it rationally. Some of the experiences you have
yes,
had.
and that's
why
I'm considered sane. That's why I'm considered sane is because I have cognitive dissonance about it. I have two opposing perceptions because. Almost like Occam's razor, the simplest explanation is that I am psychic or that I'm having phenomena, and it's taken me a lot of work to construct this other image in my mind, and that's very grounding and very healthy, and that's what that terminology and translation one was about as well. Like,
but it's also hard if you're in that position and you can't decide about something, say almost a point of view on anything, and there's conflicting evidence both ways. It's very, very hard to know actually which is the simplest explanation from our limited viewpoint, you know, because we are quite emotional beings, right? So we're not just fact-based beings. So like, if you have when you have,
sort of saying that my desire for it to be true might make it seem true.
Or just your emotional response to a certain. If you're mulling over two points of view, for example, politics, right? You're mulling over like two different political viewpoints. One might be left wing, one might be right wing, and we have attachments to one, or people have attachments to one or the other, and they find it very hard to actually look at things objectively.
Well, this is kind of how I've responded to it, is by basically rejecting that both notions, that either explanation is true,
right? Yeah,
and that's what keeps me in this point of semi-cognitive dissonance, but also like we're quite able to be in cognitive dissonance. Smoking is a good example of that. Like it might be uncomfortable, but it can actually be productive. Like I know this is a cup, but I also no, like just cigarettes.
Oh, okay.
Like trying to overcome the idea that like as Bill Bailey says, it's like lovely, 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 lovely. I'm going to die in one breath. You're thinking that, like, you know, it's that kind of thing. It's like if it keeps me sane, I can reject both ideas and assume there must be a third middle way, a third explanation.
No, might be. Who knows?
Yeah. Or even that, paradoxically, both explanations are true.
Yeah.
And then, so what I'm left with is how to make this into useful information, how to do something productive with it, and this is what all of this is about, really.
Yeah.
But it's actually very validating and interesting and reassuring to hear that would be compelling to you. Not because I want you to experience that, but just because it validates for me that it's quite rational to have responded to these phenomena with belief. Or believing that I had knowledge.
Yeah.
You know. So the next question is, or the next topic, I'm going to take a bit of a backseat on, because I know from some of your meditative experiences and self-contemplation, you've got a lot of interesting concepts surrounding free will. Now, I can't say I won't challenge them, but I'm going to try and let you speak as freely as possible. So
we've had a lot of discussions about this, haven't we?
Yeah,
I've had a lot of discussions about this with a lot of people, because it's a very, I think it's a fascinating topic. Partly just the way that people react to it. Like, it's a really, it feels like it's a very important topic to people, and some people really react strongly against the things that I say about it. Not you.
No,
I've spoken to other people who have really objected quite.
Is that perhaps due to it undermines a lot of their identity and things like that?
Yeah. So I mean, I don't really understand. I don't really understand, because I don't feel like that about it. So I find it hard to
relate to that.
To relate to why they feel that way, but they do feel. Anyway, yeah. So free will. I'm of the opinion that that our kind of traditional notion of free will is just this kind of a myth. It's almost impossible to explain a reality where free will could exist. Like, logically, it's very difficult when you think that we are a product of. I mean, this body, this being, is a product of billions of interlocking systems. Like, on the ground level that we're aware of, you've got subatomic particles and then atoms and there these chemical reactions between molecules happening, and eventually you've got kind of cells forming, and they're communicating in incredible ways, like massively parallel system of
quantum entanglement as well.
Okay, yeah.
So like some certain cells, like I'll let you continue.
But yeah, and it, obviously it keeps going up layer by layer, and you cells and neurons, and then all those neurons, billions of them, and these just vastly parallel circuits, creating all of this, like everything that I've ever witnessed, is created by that, all those neurons in this massively parallel system, and so if you look at all that, and then you think, well, how could there possibly be a being in charge of all that? Because it's all down to the smallest minute. It's cause and effect. One force causes another thing to happen. And even if you don't take that scientific, I mean, the Buddha basically reached this conclusion, but he didn't use the word free will. But he basically, from studying that, he broke down a being. He didn't break it down into atoms or neurons because they didn't know about that. But he broke down a being into what they call 5 aggregates. So you have the aggregate of matter. So basically these 5 things are what create a being, but also what create the world, and also what creates dukkha, which means suffering, and but also impermanence. But basically, so all these 5 things create the world, and you have matter. So matter includes obviously all the matter in the world, and also their corresponding senses, so like the eyes, the ears for sound and touch them, and also the mind for thoughts, because he considered thoughts are a part of the world, and they are
they're a response to your sense perception.
But yeah, but they're also, I mean, when you look at it from a scientific point of view, they are literally physical things going on. They are a
literal
electrical signal, and you're sensing them with that sense organ, which is the mind. It senses the thoughts, just as your eyes sense the light. You know, your mind senses those electrical things going on in your brain, which are thoughts. So you've got matter, then sensation is created by matter. So the sensation caused by your sight, and you know, your thoughts and everything. Then perception, which is when you label something, you know that it is. For example, you know that this is red. So your eye senses red, but then your perception is what kind of labels it or knows. And then you have. So
that's how you interpret the information.
Yeah. And then and then that gives rise to mental volition, he called it, which is basically any mental formation, which is like a desire or aversion, belief, like anything that's a volitional thing. So that anything you're kind of like, where you know you're not just an observer, but you're kind of. I mean, it's when you know. I desire this, or I don't want this, or I.
It's a response to what you've observed.
Yeah. It's kind of you. Yeah, you responding to.
And that's volition.
Yeah, volition. And then finally, the aggregate of consciousness, which I don't quite understand actually why that's separate from sensation, because the way he defines consciousness is that you have, for example, visual consciousness is that eye sees light, and that's visual consciousness. Kind of means the same thing as seeing, but it's quite interesting because he's claiming by defining consciousness like that in 5 types. So your mind, your eyes, your auditory consciousness. Actually, it's more than 5 because gustatory, taste, olfactory consciousness, and tactile consciousness. So all these different types of consciousness. It's quite interesting that he defines them like that, because that shows that we are basically. He said someone who can show me the coming and the going and of consciousness, which is apart from taste and sight and thoughts and smell and is talking of something that doesn't exist. So he's saying we are, you know,
that's quite interesting.
We are, you know, so he was one of the.
It's irreducible, basically. You can't remove the.
You can't separate it from.
It's almost
the
like
world,
self-awareness itself is an illusion. It's because arguably it's just the matter that's generating the perception.
The matter generates the consciousness. The consciousness arises in the gate of the sense organ that it is associated with. So with no sense organs, there can be no consciousness. You know, with no world, with no matter.
That would answer his question, though, wouldn't it? Because if you cease to have the perceptions of the sense organ, you cease to exist. Yeah. But
also, So he's claiming quite a few things by breaking down the world in this way. One thing he's claiming is that consciousness is here because we are this body. You know, it's created by this world and this body. It's not a separate soul. He's kind of saying, look, there is no separate soul that can be conscious outside of this world, because this is it. This is why you're conscious. And he's also saying everything is cause and effect. He's saying the sensation gives rise to perception, which gives rise to mental volition, which gives rise. Everything gives rise to something else. Everything conditions the next thing. So we, you know, there is, you know, and that's why he came to the conclusion there is no self in the way that we
feel.
The way that we feel when we have notions, the traditional notions of free will, we feel that there is some kind of driver, agent. They apparently, Buddhists say that there is no. They often don't use the term free will, but they say there's no agenthood
or no agency in general.
So that there is no thinker. There's only thought. There's no thinker. Yeah. There's no doer. There's only doing. There's no mover.
The only thing that I would say I disagree with. I don't even disagree. The only real question I have is why, with that in mind, is something you were saying the other day. You don't necessarily believe that enlightenment is possible,
right?
But it sounds like these characteristic observations and your understanding. That's how people describe the sensation arising when you're enlightened. You realise that you are not phenomenologically relevant. You step out of yourself. You cease to be yourself. At some sort of fundamental level. But it sounds like that knowledge and that description of it would require you to do that, to know that.
Well, I feel like
initially had that observation.
Yeah, I feel like I've only
must have done it from a position of no self, and that might be something you might have.
I feel like I've only had that experience close to it once, where I felt like I knew that was the case, that there was no me, rather than it just seeming like, rather than it's just like, oh, this this makes sense
it became self-evident.
Yeah. Rather than like at the moment when I'm talking about it, I'm like, okay, this is a thing that makes sense as a story that I'm talking about.
Yeah,
and
but
it's still
it's not
a
like
series of like
compelling.
I'm not like, you know, like the experience I had once before when I was like, oh shit, like I knew it was true. I was just like, this is self-evident. You're just like, oh yeah, obviously, like this is just happening, and there's no.
That to me sounds like awakening.
Yeah, and I feel like it was, but then also it was transient, so therefore it's not real. It's not how they define
it's
enlightenment.
not true enlightenment.
Yeah, and also I think as well that there's the other thing about, like, I can imagine that side of enlightenment more easily because I feel like I've had a small glimpse at it, but I can't imagine the other side of enlightenment, which is that you will no longer be averse to unpleasant sensation.
Sure.
Like I can't imagine.
When you were in that situation,
I think I still would have been very averse if someone grabbed me and decided to torture me or something.
But
I would have been like, "Oh, this is horrible."
Did you experience that at the time, though?
No.
And it's like, because I often talk about like glimpses like that as they're like a window.
Yeah.
And then you spend the rest of your life figuring out how to get back there through a door.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, that's how I would frame that. So it's an insight into it, and like the development it might take to get back to that place might equip you with the ability to not be adverse to any phenomena.
Mm. Yeah, maybe.
By
I mean, I can't
accessing that state permanently. You would have had to go through a process of what they call like structural, development or structural teaching or structural evolution. Yeah. That by its virtue would mean you would no longer suffer. You would no longer have aversion or retraction. Yeah. It just, I mean, I find that's how I would try and imagine it.
Yeah. I find that thing really hard to conceptualize, that you could be in a position where you have no aversion or craving at all, because like.
But can you imagine?
Because
all
we are,
for example,
sensation.
Depressed.
All we are is
where you feel nothing of happiness.
Yeah.
You feel no attachment. You feel isolated. You feel so. To a certain extent, you may have even experienced this, like what it's like.
No, but I think depression is aversion. That's why you feel horrible. That's why you don't enjoy it, because you're feeling massively averse, and that's why you're depressed, because you're massively averse to the sensations.
So you know what that's like. That's aversion. So if you can imagine the absence of that aversion, can you imagine what that might feel like?
I can't imagine experiencing a really unpleasant sensation and still not feeling averse to it, like being tortured or something.
I suppose that's why it takes 20 years to develop it, though. Arguably, that's why people talk about structural teachings. That's why it's like. That's why. Like I've argued before, that Charles Manson thinks he's enlightened because he feels no moral conviction. That's why he's considered a sociopath. He doesn't feel there's any consequences to anything, and doesn't feel he's able to tolerate any experience.
Right.
Then he thinks that is that. And that's why the structural and ethical morals that as far as I understand it, that you build into that process of evolution are incredibly important. Because even if, like I argued this before, like Charles Manson may well have experienced enlightenment, and that informed like the actual sensation of what that feels like, but because of the life he led, the conditions he was under, he carried through with him his own judgment on how to interpret that.
But you think maybe Charles Manson reached a point where he experienced no aversion or craving?
I'm presenting it as a thought experiment, rather than I'm not validating his beliefs of that.
Because you think you need a aversion to want to like kill people, or something.
But you would also need to have no aversion to be able to kill people.
No aversion to, I suppose the horror thing or something.
Yeah.
But
which is quite a scary thought. So let's maybe change the subject a little bit. But it demonstrates the principle of there are these extremes, and what you take to that experience, your own experience of this reality determines, like in my hallucinations and visions, how you then digest that information once you reach that state.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing, you may well be right, the only thing I feel like I have to add to that is that I once had the other experience that I once had, which felt like a bit of a glimpse into something that might be closer to awakening, or a tiny glimpse at something like that, was at the Vipassana course, and doing. It's like a 10-day.
Oh, we thought is it that moment you had?
Yeah. So it's like a 10-day silent meditation course, and you just constantly meditating. Basically, it's quite intense, and the whole thing is that you basically you kind of doing body scans, moving your awareness throughout your body. But your sensations are really heightened because you spend such a long time in the first few days just focusing on a very small area around your nose. Okay. It really sharpens the mind, so that when you finally move your awareness throughout your body, you experience crazy tinglings and bizarre
you've
sensations
trained your
everywhere.
concentration
So you notice so much information in your body that you didn't know was there. But as a result, you experience lots of sensations that are very unpleasant and lots that are pleasant, and you experience
the
this
entire
kind
time
of
you're trying to retain equanimity.
So the whole thing is that you're by not reacting, by remaining equanimous, not reacting to any of these sensations, you're training your subconscious in future to be more equanimous to sensations in general.
So that is basically precisely what I was.
Yeah, exactly. So I can believe that if you did that constantly, it would at least. I can believe you'd get very far, but I just can't imagine the total lack of any aversion or so. But anyway,
the people that experience it may believe
they're
having no aversion, but actually they're unaware that they're averse because they're in such a state of tranquility and bliss from the other side of it, that sense of non-attachment, that detached self, that they don't recognise, they disown their negative aversions. Like you get this in the case of like Zen, where you attain enlightenment and then you become a master by re-owning all of the things. You become a Zen master by taking on and accepting all of the things that you disowned by that glorious state of revelation.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Because yeah. You're not. That was that. Something apparently that the Buddha talked about as well was that how even the highest spiritual states are all dukkha. Dukkha means suffering, impermanence. Precisely because they're impermanent, and eventually when he described it, like you reach a point where you stop willing any form of creation, any form of, because all of that is a mental creation. So you get to a point where you're creating a blissful state. That's still a mental creation. It's not reality. It's not, and reality is nirvana.
And you've trained yourself to be able to perceive, even if it is an alternate level of reality. You've trained yourself to be able to perceive and accept that. But even that,
and also, it's not, according to him, it's not truth, because truth is nirvana. Truth is this reality, and it's the
interdependent with
it's just
samsara sort of thing.
Well, apparently
almost,
that they say it is the same thing,
like
depending on
But
but so that is it's a mental creation because you're still willing, the forces of like continuation and becoming. You want to create. You're still desiring something, right? You're still creating
even if it's to sustain the experience or to not sustain the experience.
Exactly,
even running away from it, or
But the only thing I was just back to the Charles Manson. It was just that the only reason why I would think maybe that's not the case, that he would be not experiencing any version of craving, and obviously what the hell do I know? But I experienced I had this very small experience, tiny experience really, but like where I was, when I was meditating and I had all these feelings, unpleasant feelings and pleasant feelings, and then I had and I was trying to remain equanimous to all of them, and I noticed that the pleasant feelings were kind of like these tingles all over my body, these sort of waves of tingles, and then the unpleasant feelings were this kind of tightness and lumps and tightness in the body, and anyway, and I kind of got to a point where I kind of realised how ridiculous it was, and how meaningless one was compared to the other, and how and then when I came out of my meditation, I went for a walk, and I felt like I was tripping really hard, like everything was just so vibrant, and then I felt this really deep, like I kind of almost started crying, so I just felt this really deep compassion for sort of, I don't know, it felt like that underneath that, if somehow you let go of it, there is this just compassion under there, and that's what I believe, because that's what
That
That's
sounds like when
what
I talk about that entity I interacted with, that it's external, that's what I talk about when I talk about God. That's why I use that word, because it's the closest thing to describe it. But it is, yeah, it's good. Yeah, I don't know what to say. That other than it sounds like you're actually quite good at it. You if you're able to have this, because a lot of people go to these things and spend years and years and years not achieving these kind of phenomena.
Yeah.
Whereas you have.
Yeah.
And even if they're transient now, or just a glimpse, or it may not be indicative of actual enlightenment necessarily, that you have the ability to attain that, and listening to you talk about it and seeing how compelling it was for you, that maybe this is a path that you should follow, even if it's just to find out what that compassion is.
Yeah. I should work harder really at it. But I wonder if somehow that compassion is to do with this. Because when you finally let go of that craving and that aversion, you are also letting go of self in a way. Because your self, your illusion of self, is almost a thing that craves and is averse. Because it's the thing that wants things to be different from the way they are.
Sure, yeah.
And that almost is the same thing as the idea of self, somehow. It's this kind of like
it's
not being happy with the
coin.
present moment and wanting it to be different and grasping. That kind of is the self. So in a way, once you stop doing that, there is no self, and when there's no self, you just see all the suffering,
beauty
in the world.
And suffering, though, as well, not just the suffering.
Yeah. But you because you're not thinking of yourself.
Yeah.
There's nothing to stop you thinking of other people. Do you know what I mean? There's no longer that obsession with yourself that stops you thinking about. You know, you can only be truly.
Psychosis sort of felt like it was like I was running around. Obviously, it wasn't. Again, not enlightenment, but describing it that absolute lack of self-awareness, in like lack of self-consciousness, and just seeing the world as it truly was. It seemed like something had suddenly opened my eyes, and like as though the extreme state I'd put myself in had showed me, like you said, all the suffering, all the joy, all the suffering, everything just as it was, like. Rather than by how I perceived it, and then I saw all these new phenomena arise. Yeah. And then as that part of me gradually came back in, which I think I needed help, I needed medication. That's why I asked for help. But you're very much describing my experience as well, to a certain extent, or it feels like you are.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm sure there's. Yeah. There must be. I'm sure that's. Well, definitely something I don't know enough about at all, but there's very interesting. I'm sure there's a very interesting area where, you know, the boundary between what is psychosis and what is a spiritual experience and what is a psychedelic experience and what is a meditation experience, and all these things, they meet somewhere.
They're all in a weird way, they're all mental phenomena.
Yeah. But there's something in common with all of those things, which is something to do with the dissolution of the illusion of yourself or something. It's something to do with that, which is why they're all
I guess maybe where you might disagree with what I'm about to say, I'm not sure, but I would argue that being in that state of complete selflessness, that's what is the spirit that we're talking about in spirituality. That is, for lack of a better word, that is God.
Yeah, because there's no longer that illusion of self. Then what is there? What is that thing that remains?
And you can't see it when you're there, because that would require it to be not you. That would require it to be external, and then you see the world reflected in you, and that's where you get oneness from.
Well, I think there's a
or at least the sensation of absolute oneness and no self, no other.
I think there's an interesting point where that thing, like from a metaphysical point of view, that like it's quite interesting because, well, from what I understand in Hinduism, they sort of Atman, right, is the almost like everything. Like when you realise that you are Atman, you realise that you are the universe. And Atman is the self with a capital S. It's like all of this. It's like essentially you know it's like Alan Watts talks about this stuff quite a lot.
I've been listening to those recordings you get.
Oh
very interesting.
It's great. But he says that great sentence when he said, "If I am my foot, I am the sun." Because in a way, I have no more knowledge or control over how all the blood cells in my foot are multiplying, whatever the fuck they're doing, and I do how the atoms in the sun are burning up.
But I claim to.
But
have
this is
ownership,
me, and that's not.
me,
And in the same way, you can actually extend that throughout the whole body. Even the brain, you can extend all of this. I still have no knowledge of how all my neurons are firing everything, not any more than I do out the sun.
That's why I say that the closest reducible point we can get before entering into that no self space is what Ken Wilber calls the ever-present witness, the perspective of God.
Yeah.
The perspective of that selfless self, like who you are when you're in that state.
Yeah.
That is as irreducible as we are.
Yeah, but I think the problem there is that thing is obviously going to be beyond words. So it's like in Buddhism, they say anatta, no self. So and then in Hinduism they say the Atman, the self with the big S, right? But when you get to that point of, for example, it's all there is, right? So all there is this, right? So if you get to the point where you're like, okay, there's no self, I am the universe, right? I am a part of the universe witnessing itself. Yeah. Essentially, that's what we are.
We become not only longer the reflection of God's image, but we become the image itself. And then we start to see the image reflected as God. That's when the shift takes place. Yeah. You start to see everything as God, or everything as the Atman, everything as Brahman.
But what I'm trying to say is, surely it's literally just whether you decide to call it God, or you could just call it everything, or you could just call it the universe, or you could just call it emptiness. That's what the Buddha called it, right? It doesn't really matter. It's irrelevant. These are all just words. So
again, the reason I use the word God is because of the images it conjures, and that people have a strong reaction to it. That puts them in a certain frame of mind when you use that term. Yeah. Thus giving them, like we said earlier on, if I use the word God, it enables us to have a metaphysical debate about the nature of God without ever attaching ourselves to that.
But I would be
slightly problematic, but that's why I use those terms still.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of because apparently one of the reasons why the Buddha talked about is that why he claimed that there's no not only there's no self within us, but there's no self with the big S as well.
Yeah.
And there's and it's all emptiness.
Sure.
And is because he claimed that all of these words just give people false images.
Yeah.
So that they then have an idea of God, and then they're looking for this thing that they've created in their head. They make a mental creation, they create it, and then they look for it.
You said it
but
perfectly.
When you just try and see things for how they really are, you're no longer going to be creating an image of a God, or you're just going to go, this is.
Do you think that by virtue of what you just said, it might be possible that you may already be enlightened and not realise it? Because that's a thought that's occurred to me quite many a time. It's like, if I was to just acknowledge, because like they say that if everyone is one, everyone is God, everyone is equal, everyone is of the same source and substance. It's just their recognition of it and what they choose to do with their mind. Like, for all you know, you could be in that enlightened state and the mind tells you that you're not, but your point of reference is already there.
Yeah. Well, I suppose in a way
the idea that you need to transform to become that's a mental projection.
Yeah, right, yeah.
That's an image of what you're going to be like when you're enlightened.
Yeah, which
that prevents you from knowing what that actually feels
like.
Yeah. So that's a nice closing statement.
Yeah.
But let's have a look if there's anything else we wanted to cover that I haven't covered. No, it was about psychedelics and my own experience of psychedelics, and we did integrate that. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. And this has been the podcast, episode 7, I believe. Say goodbye, Eddie.
Goodbye.
Bye, YouTube. We'll see you on the other side.